Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get the lecture going. Thank you very much for joining me here tonight. Everything going okay on your end? Great. Okay, looking at the course, we're pretty much on schedule. I'm slightly behind where I'd like to be as far as grading. I'm getting the Photoshop practice from Friday out of the way tonight. So you may have seen my feedback already. If not, you will by the end of the evening. And then I will be focusing on the second part of the projects, the visual mission statement projects tomorrow and Thursday. So you'll have my feedback by the weekend in a more timely manner this time around. I was hoping to get a lot more grading done today, but I ended up having a lot of being on the phone with tech support a lot, having internet outages. But so apologies for the delay there. Let's see, what else? Just I'll be looking at the projects, like I said, tomorrow and Thursday, and I'll also be peeking back at the previous week's work. So if you did make any changes, hopefully you let me know, but I'll try to catch those as well. Because just as a reminder, each week you can update the previous week's part of the project to make any revisions that were needed based on feedback you received, or even just changes that you feel need to be made, and then let me know, and I'll go back, and you can regain up to 10 points on the initial grade. So it's a bit of a second chance for those particular projects. And we are in week 3. So far, I think the Photoshop practices have been going very well from what I've seen, and that's really good. Because you'll be putting those skills to work next week in week 4 for the final design. And that's where all the stuff you're doing in your mood boards comes together with your Photoshop practice, and you create that visual mission statement. So a visual representation of your mission statement. So keep on practicing with Photoshop. We certainly encourage you to go beyond the practice activities as time permits, though I know that time is pretty tight. Did you have any questions? I guess I just asked that in a way, but anything on your mind that I can clarify?
I think I'm good. Sorry.
No problem. Yeah, and you're welcome to use the chat or the microphone, either way. All right, so this week we're dealing with 2 topics. We're dealing with typography, and we're doing typography not in the sense of kerning and spacing and all of that technical detail that goes in typography, but really focus on selecting typefaces that match a particular style, and give a particular impression, based on the creative direction that you're going in, maybe a particular historical era, but also on how to select typefaces that go well together, pair them together so that they have some kind of a harmonious appearance, but also are differentiated enough to present 2 separate looks, and that allows you to differentiate different pieces of information and different priorities. We're also going to be looking at a topic called visual hierarchy, which is not directly related to typography, but it does play. Typefaces do play a part. Visual hierarchy is the idea of directing your viewer's attention, to calling attention to specific things first, giving them priority, and creating a hierarchy, which is an order of importance. So starting off with typefaces, this class is about aesthetics, as the name implies. And aesthetics can be many different things. If we were studying film and cinematography, the aesthetics would be things like light and shadow, the chiaroscuro effects, and framing and leading lines and so forth. Our heavy emphasis throughout MCBS is on personal branding, with the intention of allowing that to be transferred to creating a brand for any clients that you work with in the future. So from a visual design standpoint, that's our emphasis. So my emphasis with our study of aesthetics is on branding, and the typefaces are no exception to that. Thinking about our definition of aesthetics, it's various media elements, how they interact, and the impression created by that interaction. And this is another element of your media designs. If you look at this, this is kind of similar to what I showed last week when I changed out the brand colors, and you see the disconnect that creates. Here you have Google written in probably a very recognizable typeface or font. We tend to use the words font and typeface interchangeably. Technically, they're not the same thing. Typeface is the style of the lettering, whereas font is things like the boldness, the heaviness of the lettering and the color and so forth, the size. So, but for practical purposes, we can use them interchangeably. I will probably refer to this as a font. But that's the Coca-Cola font. You know this and you recognize it, but you can see how integral that typeface is to the brand identity of Coca-Cola, and how you don't recognize Google by looking at this. You recognize Coke. Something similar here. Golden arches, that recognizable logo design, and also the typeface, but this is not promoting McDonald's. And again, point being, this is part of a brand's personality. One thing that we emphasize is that a brand is not just a logo, and it's not just a single product. A brand is everything that creates the personality of that entity, and this is a part of it, is establishing this personality through the style of lettering. Disney has that very iconic handwritten style that they use in a lot of their signage, a lot of their titles, and anything that is specifically of the Disney brand. Coca-Cola has a very historical, kind of old-fashioned looking script, whereas NASA is super futuristic, so it captures the nature of the brand itself, the subject itself. The key is to use these consistently across the board. Anytime that any media is created related to the Disney company, you'll see this typeface at the beginning of almost every Disney film. There's that shot of the castle, and Tinkerbell flies through and makes a little arch of sparkly stars, and then there's the Disney name. And it's by keeping that consistency that you start to build recognizability. People, like we just saw, will recognize the typeface for Coca-Cola even if it says something that isn't Coca-Cola. It doesn't matter what the verbal message is. It's the visual message that they're receiving. I showed this last week in terms of use of color for the Burger King brand. Also look at the typefaces, though. This very heavy serif font that they use. I don't know exactly which typeface that is, but it is the Burger King typeface. And if you look at their website, it's there too. It's on the packaging. It's on, all the bags, all the cups. all the signs, and everywhere you look, it's there. So it's building that image and that identity. And this is what this exercise is going to be for you in the mood board activity, the visual mission statement. What you're going to be doing, in effect, is establishing your own personal brand as a media professional, whatever role that might be in the media world. In the process of expressing your mission, you're also going to set the style. This is something that you'll revisit, in fact, when you get down the road to the graphic design course and possibly other courses in the program. Jacob Kaplan, who teaches that course, will refer back to what you did here on your mood board, and you'll have a chance to make use of these brand typefaces and colors in creating business cards and letterhead and other kind of packaging and branding. Certainly, you're free to change it. This is not going to be carved in stone, but you can start to develop that. Typically, in any media design, you'll have one or two typefaces. Very rarely will you see more than that, unless you're specifically creating some artistic design that just features multiple typefaces, which you see occasionally. But if you're simply presenting media, whether it's a advertisement design or your movie splash screen or your website, you usually won't have more than two. Typically one for headings and titles and banners, and then one for informational content. This is from the Full Sail website, I believe. It might be from, I believe this is from the website. And this is an example. You have your heading typeface, which is intended to stand out. It's typically heavier in the font size and weight, and usually has more personality. So that is where you establish personality, whereas the body text is simply focused on clarity. It's meant to be readable. It's presenting information in a very clear and legible way, especially when there's going to be a lot of text. You want it to be very straightforward and very clean and readable. No fancy stylized typefaces for this, because that becomes a strain on your reader's eyes. Here's an example that's less of a document and more of a visual design, where you have your heading text and then the information presented and body text. Sometimes you'll see just simply something as simple as a business card, where there'll be the title and then the contact information, and it won't be a whole lot of text like you see here. But you still want those typefaces to look good together and to harmonize together. And this is where things get tricky. Similarity is not always the key factor there. In fact, oftentimes, if you've done the reading for this week, you'll know that contrast, in fact, is what you're going for. You want to be able to differentiate those two. So there are some pretty simple basic rules of thumb for pairing typefaces together. which I'll touch on in just a minute. This is actually, this slide is, I got ahead of myself. This is just showing some examples of why it's important to use really straightforward and classic typefaces for body text. When you pick text for larger bodies of content, you want to stick with your basic sans serif and serif typefaces. Sans serif are those that are pretty clean with straight lines. Serif typefaces have the little hooks on the ends, the little extensions, and look a little more classic, a little more old-fashioned, some might say. But these are your go-to types of text. And these are categories, by the way, just to be clear. Things like Arial and Helvetica Neue are sans serif. That should be sans with an S. Whereas serif typefaces would include Times New Roman, I think Garamond, I want to say, and some others that have that similar style. Here's what the problem is with more decorative typefaces. Yes, they have more personality, more artistic expression, but become very difficult to read. Especially this one on the right. You can see if that was a long block of text, your eyes would be watering by the end. So sticking to these tried and true typefaces is the way to go for your body typefaces. Another benefit of sticking with the classic typefaces for your body text is that if you're working online with websites, sharing typefaces becomes hard, more challenging. You want to make sure that you're using something that every computer is going to be able to display, otherwise the formatting will get all wonky. Also, if you were to share your mood board with me using a typeface that I didn't have installed on my computer, it would not display the same. It just would not show up. Yeah, and might need to get new glasses after reading some of those more stylized typefaces. So keep this in mind when you do your mood board, because a lot of times I will see really interesting and stylish typefaces chosen for body text, but they're just not practical. And when you choose the body typeface for your personal style and your personal brand, think practical, think usability over style. Headings and titles and logos are where you can start building in more personality. So you have more freedom here. You get to choose something that represents your personality, your style for your headers. The key now is that they stand out, especially differentiated from the body text. Because you want your viewer to instantly be able to pick up that heading. Maybe it identifies who you are or who your subject is or what service you provide, what category of information they're seeing. That should be immediately apparent. And so making that stand out is the key. Since it's usually much shorter pieces of text for headings, you can have a little more leeway in terms of the typefaces that you choose. So you can get into some of the more interesting display typefaces, but you still want it to be readable. From the textbook readings, or the article readings this week, the most essential rule to keep in mind is that if you're using a serif typeface for your body text, pick a sans serif typeface for your header. That gives good contrast and good differentiation. Or vice versa. Sans serif headings with a serif typeface or sans serif with serif typefaces. So reverse it depending on what you choose. That's the easiest way to go, and you really won't go wrong. You can look at the specific typefaces and pick some that kind of have a similar idea, like maybe they both have heavy lines, even though one has the serifs and the other does not. And sometimes they will mesh a little better. But just that simple contrast will do well. Sometimes you can find some that have a family of typefaces, such as Helvetica New has Helvetica New Black, which is really heavy for headings, and then Helvetica New Regular, which is the body text, and that's really really useful, very practical, because now you have both purposes all in one, headings and body text all in one. So you maintain a really consistent style that way. But you're not limited to those more, some might say, boring typefaces for your headings. You can really add some personality. These are often called display fonts or display typefaces because they're used for display purposes. They're not used for information. They're used for artistic expression. And that's when you get the script fonts, like the Disney font or the Billabong. Some really stylized typefaces like the one you see up here in the upper left or upper right, and so forth. Some of these are often custom created for the subject, like Disney, like Coca-Cola. Those are custom made. They are not really ones that you would use in everyday purpose, for your Word documents. They are integral to that brand. And of course, they paid a graphic designer a lot of money to create those for them. But for our purposes, since we aren't Walt Disney and can't hire a team of artists to create our brands, we can rely on what's available. And there is a ton of typefaces available out there for free on websites like defont.com and 1001fonts.com and so forth. Many of them have very unique styles. A lot of them are based on popular culture, different movie titles, and so forth. I would say steer away from those simply because they're already associated with a brand like the Avengers or Star Trek or what have you. But there's tons that are specific, that are unique, not connected with any particular existing brand, but have really interesting appearances. Look for ones that match your personality. Here's a couple of examples. The one in the upper left has this sort of 1960s counterculture look with the kind of bottom-heavy lettering. There's a local chain of pizza restaurants called Mellow Mushroom. I know there's one in Atlanta, but I don't know if they're very widespread. But they have that theme, the 1960s theme. And so this kind of typeface would be common on their menus and their other print media, and even on their signage. It fits their personality. Something that's dealing with electronic gaming might have something that's pixelated, like the one here in the lower left. So when you go to some of the sites that have fonts, they're usually in categories like futuristic, sci-fi, historical, medieval, and so forth. And so you can kind of dig through and find the ones that match what you're going for. if you're going for something that has that kind of unique look with a specific theme. I would say avoid ones that are way too stylized and too distorted to where it becomes difficult to read. The example I gave in the lower right is meant to represent this. It's a little, actually, this isn't too bad, but some of them get very, really distorted. A lot of the grunge typefaces are like this, where it's just becomes really challenging to make out. And you still want your viewers to be able to immediately receive your message and identify who you are. And I'm trying to think if I had any other specific points that I wanted to make in regard to selecting your typefaces. Overall, and just talking specifically about the mood board assignment, what I really want to see is that you've thought about why you're picking these typefaces and how they connect to your mission statement and your identity as a media professional or what have you. Whatever you're trying to represent. And it shouldn't simply be an arbitrary choice, especially with the heading typefaces. Do you have any questions so far? I think you are probably in transit right now, so I don't want you distracted. Sorry?
Oh, you can hear me.
I can.
No, I'm good. I'm good.
Okay, wonderful. In terms of using your typefaces, and this would apply especially in the final design next week when you're putting this all together, but also in any kind of documents that you create, any kind of graphic design you do. There are certain simple do's and don'ts to keep in mind. Don't choose form over function. And this ties back into what I was saying about body text typefaces. You want it to be readable. You don't want to lose your message in favor of style if the purpose is to convey information. The example I'm showing here is the menu designs that were in one of the readings for this week. That display typeface is great for setting the mood and tone and style of the menu, but if you use it in the descriptions of the menu items, it becomes problematic. It becomes very difficult to process. So making use of that.
I had
Go ahead.
a restaurant that was in our area that it wasn't the font. They purposely spelled things incorrectly as part of their brand. Mm-hmm. And people got so frustrated they stopped going to the restaurant, and the restaurant went out of business.
Oh my gosh. Well, yeah, there you go. So don't frustrate your customers, if it's restaurant customers or website visitors or what have you. So same rules would apply if you're designing a website. Don't make it challenging to consume the content, the message that you're putting out there. Touched on this one already too. Don't use too many typefaces. I see it occasionally. I see designs where there's an attempt to make something visually interesting by including a lot of different typefaces, but it often just it looks cluttered or confusing. It looks, and it looks like someone is trying to cram a lot of things in there for the sake of visual interest. But most often, simplicity and elegance creates so much better visual impressions than any of this really can. Occasionally, I've seen designs that have a specific focus on words or styles, and so they use multiple typefaces to make that point, but that's with a purpose in mind. So unless you have a purpose for using many typefaces, just don't. Limit it to 2 maximum. This is something I've commented on already on a lot of the Photoshop practice activities, and that is poor contrast. Typically, when you create a document, whether it's a Word document or a website, the most ideal color combination is dark text on a light background, usually black text on a white background, although I've read that there are advantages to using dark gray text on a white background, that it can aid readers who are dyslexic and have other kind of visual and cognitive impairments in that way. So you will often see that. A lot of times it's that very dark charcoal gray rather than pure black, because the black text can have really harsh contrast. Light text on a dark background is also very clear, though it's considered less preferable than the dark text on light. It can be a strain on the eyes. Avoid text that's too similar to the background color, because that can be challenging for your viewers. I just went too far with my slides, but so make sure that there is strong contrast regardless of the colors you're using. And look out for this, and I don't know if you can see this on your phone, but for those looking at the archive, and there's really not a way to, I can't really tell you specific color combinations that will create this effect, but when it's this really jarring neon contrast that just, it's such an eyesore that it becomes difficult to read. This has good contrast, but there's that sort of it almost seems like it's vibrating. It's so sharp and harsh a contrast. And that's something that's sort of a judgment call, so look out for that. Also, if you're using a complex photograph as the background and you're applying text to it, pay attention to what that text is overlapping. If there's dark details in the background and you're using a dark typeface, some letters might become obscured. If that happens too much, then you might be losing your message, and you might be losing the clarity of your text. And this one is one that you probably won't be able to, if you can't see the slide, you might not get what I'm talking about, but it's the idea of association. And that means putting text that is closely associated close together in proximity, so placing them next to each other on the document. If you create a separation, whether it's placing text too far away from the pieces, too far away from each other, or including dividing lines that separate pieces, the viewer will not consider those to be associated, and it can confuse their reading. The example I have shows Arctic fox, and on one side the Arctic fox has white fur, on the other it's dark fur, and so the image is divided right in half, but the text reads all the way left to right. However, because of the division in the image, it looks like it should be red. This white fox has been given, which is white predominantly. Spring or summer sets in, this thinner and starts to become, which doesn't make any sense. So, point being, consider how people read naturally, because at least English speakers will read left to right, top to bottom, and make sure that the connections are very clear. Color plays a big part in association as well. text that's the same color will be considered to be associated together, whereas contrasting or different colored text will be considered separate groupings. So consider that if sometimes I'll see designs where each word is a different color or the letters are in different colors and so forth, but really be consistent. I would say in terms of font colors, much like fonts themselves, no more than 2. And I just mentioned this, but natural reading. Remember that if you are talking to an English-speaking audience, they're going to intuitively read left to right, top to bottom. If you have text placed in sort of a creative manner at different places on your image, be mindful of what order you want that read in. So if you have a piece at the top right, and then another piece around middle left, and then another piece in the center at the bottom, you're not really giving them an intuitive layout. Whereas if you start in the upper left and then make it flow naturally, it makes it easier for your viewer. It's not that they won't figure it out in the end, but you don't want to make it difficult. The examples I have here are, I was imagining this as sort of a magazine title or a book title, Ready for Liftoff, with Ready For aligned to the right, to the, positioned below the liftoff section, and then the more intuitive aligned left, reading top to bottom. Text effects, for the most part, I say avoid. These are things like drop shadows, 3D transformations, or distortions. They can be used for great effect at times. This example of the Superman novel with the words zooming up in a big arc, and they have a 3D block look. It completely works, and it kind of defines the path of Superman flying. But unless you feel comfortable pulling off a design like this, usually it's good to avoid it and just use a more straightforward approach. One that's fairly simple as far as text effects that you probably can do without too much difficulty is giving your text a bit of an angle, and that kind of gives it a little bit of an action-packed look. If you just kind of tilt it to about a 30-degree angle, instead of straight horizontal, it gives it a sense of movement. In the example I'm showing here, the text follows the angle of the slope of a mountain, and so it creates the mental impression of moving upward, moving up the mountain, that matches the climbers. And if you do have any questions, feel free to hop in at any point. So those are some quick do's and don'ts of using typefaces and using text. Things to keep in mind as you go towards your final design and even in your practice assignments. Now I want to turn attention to the second topic, which is visual hierarchy. And visual hierarchy is a concept related to the layout and design of your document, whether it's a website or an ad design or a business card. Hierarchy, the word hierarchy means an arrangement or classification of things according to relative importance. So a common hierarchy that we know is social hierarchy, and that's the order of social classes from high to low. In medieval Europe, we had the king and queen. and then the next in order would be the nobility and the knights, and then at the bottom of the hierarchy is the peasants. So that pyramid is the hierarchy. It's the order of importance in that society. We're talking about a visual hierarchy, so instead of social status, we're talking about relative dominance, visual dominance, how attention-getting a particular object is or element is. And so it's ordered from most important, most attention-getting down to the fine details. You as a designer have control over this. You tell the viewer, not in a conscious and overt way, but subtly, where to look first, what's most important. That's the top of your hierarchy. And then you move down the list. Here's something that's not as vital, but also kind of important, and then down to the fine details. Taking a look at this ad we saw previously, the perfect blend, the most attention-getting thing is that coffee mug. Why is it attention-getting? Because they used complementary colors, orange and blue, to make that stand out. It's also probably the largest element, and it's positioned in a very central location. So they very purposely put that coffee mug in a style and a placement that will immediately grab your attention. So it's the top of the hierarchy. It is your most important detail. It's important because, first, it tells you this is about coffee. It's probably a cafe or a diner or something along those lines. And then you notice that there's a musical treble clef being formed from the steam coming out of the cup. So it's music and it's coffee. The next most prominent detail is the title, A Perfect Blend. Not as prominent because it uses analogous colors. It blends with the background. Still large and noticeable, but not as attention-getting as that mug. So slightly lower on the hierarchy. This is your second tier. Then there's another set of important but not vital details. The location, the date of the musical performance. And then at the very bottom, there would be all of these fine details presented in text, in very fine print. So there's multiple levels of this hierarchy. And the designer has chosen this very purposefully and controlled it using color, using size, using position. And emphasis, like the boldness of the text, even if it's the same size, adding boldness or color can add extra emphasis. So that's basically those are examples of how visual hierarchy is communicated. Color contrast, texture differences, relative shape and size, position and orientation, anything that makes it different, because our brains are geared to detect patterns, and we're geared to detect places where those patterns are broken, things that are different, things that stand out. So as a designer, you take advantage of that tendency to call attention to things. We've got an entire field of blue and teal on this poster, except for that orange coffee mug, and it stands out. Just some quick examples, and this is from the exploration for this week, where you'll be looking at book covers this time instead of movie posters, just to point out some clear visual hierarchies. This book is called The Fallacy of Campaign Finance Reform. Usually I pull these from past exploration activities just because I think they're good examples. So these are mostly a random selection. But what you see here is fallacy, the word fallacy in really large letters, really strong contrast in dark blue against the white background, and in that center top location. So that word is the top of the hierarchy. And why would they choose that particular word? Probably because it's the most compelling. It's very accusatory and very inflammatory. Fallacy is sort of, you're accusing somebody of lying, essentially, a falsehood. So that's given the most emphasis. It's going to be attention getting and kind of controversial. The conjunctions and the these and the ofs are less emphasized because they're just connecting words. But then campaign finance is given some emphasis. It's in bold white font, in a bold white font, because that's the topic. So it's important. But it's not as attention-getting as that word fallacy. That's sort of the very controversial word. So looking at this, in a quick glance will tell you what it's about and what particular angle they're approaching that topic from. An interesting thing about visual hierarchy that you see, especially with book covers, is the choice of what to emphasize, the title or the author. If the author is well known, a lot of times you'll see that emphasized, their name emphasized, and given a larger, more prominent placement. If it's a less known author, but they're really relying on the subject matter or the title to be attention-getting, then you'll see the opposite case. So generalizing that to all kinds of media, think about what we saw with the fallacy of campaign finance reform. What's going to be the most interesting, attention-getting, and draw the most interest? That's where you want to put the emphasis. And I do try to be very general in these rules that I'm talking about, in movie posters and even movie scenes, like we saw last week with the Schindler's List scene where the girl in the red coat stands out. She's the dominant element. She's the top of the visual hierarchy. Splashes of color, like in the Brave movie poster with Merida's red hair against that cool color background. Even here in Maleficent, it's very subtle, but the little details of color in an otherwise colorless image will draw attention. And web design. You can see how the red details are attention-getting. They pull your attention to the main content area, to the Register Now button at the top right. That's that call to action. So these are from the person who owns and runs this website. Those are the most important things, and that's what they want you to notice. So as you do your practice activity for this week's Photoshop practice, and especially in next week's final design, I want you to think about visual hierarchy. Where do you put emphasis, and how do you create that emphasis? What is the most important element for your viewer to notice first? Maybe it's your title, maybe it's your name. In that case, you can use a really big, bold typeface for that and emphasize those words. Maybe it's something in the image itself, and the text is secondary. In that case, really focus in on that particular object in the image, or use some of these color manipulation techniques to enhance that object in some way. Make it more colorful, or make the background less colorful so that the eye is directed to that spot. Because this is all very deliberate and all very purposeful. You create the experience that your audience has. It's not left to chance. Very little in the media world is left to chance. There's tons of research on how audiences respond to different situations, and using these kind of techniques will let you plan that experience ahead of time. I don't know if you're still with me, but if you are, do you have any questions? Okay. For those listening to the archive, I, again, will be working on grading the Photoshop assignment tonight, and then we'll start getting feedback on week 2's visual mission statement assignment tomorrow. So start getting some of those posted. Otherwise, if you have any questions as we're moving ahead, please don't hesitate to shoot me a message, and I'm happy to work with you.
Thank you.
Thank you, and I appreciate your commitment to sticking with me through your commute.
I'm just about to hit a blind spot, so I think it worked out perfect.
Well, there you go. So that is all for now.